Of the Equal Justice Initiative. We are a nonprofit human rights law firm based in Montgomery, Alabama, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention that our founder and director, Brian Stevenson, sends his greetings and his well wishes, and if his schedule had permitted, you would have him instead of me. So please know that he sends his well wishes to you all. Today I want to just share a little bit about the Equal Justice Initiative and our project areas, and then put that in the context of the history of Marion County. EJI is like I said before, a human rights law firm, nonprofit, and we've been around for about 30 years representing the most vulnerable people in our society, the people who have been incarcerated, wrongfully convicted, and children in the criminal justice system. And about 6 years ago, Brian and a team of our attorneys began a project on race and poverty because we realized that a lot of the challenges that we were facing in the court system, a lot of the topics that the other speakers have addressed, had foundations in economic and racial injustice. And so we felt that it was necessary and pertinent to have this initiative where we highlight these issues and bring it to light so that we can heal and begin to get to meaningful reform. And so for us, we talk about the history of racial injustice, and we have lots of materials that I hope that you'll stop by our table and pick up. But for us, it starts with slavery. African Americans were oppressed for centuries, and in that narrative and in that era, we talk about the ways in which this narrative of racial difference was created. There had to be some type of thought process that made it okay for white people to enslave others, and so what they said was, you are different from me, and so therefore I can enslave you. But what we didn't do was ever confront that narrative. We never dispelled that myth, and we never said that that's not right. And so for centuries after slavery, we have been dealing with the effects of that racial myth. And so we see that happening in several eras following that. So we see that in the era of racial terrorism, which is most dramatized by the era of lynching and how African Americans were terrorized by the efforts to maintain that racial hierarchy. And then we see it again in the era of Jim Crow segregation, where there are laws on the books that say that the races are separate and they have to operate in different ways. And then for us, we see it now in this final era of mass incarceration, where African Americans and poor people are disproportionately incarcerated and devastated by the policies and books that we have on the laws today. And so what I wanted to briefly mention is Marion County. So in February of this year, we released a report titled Lynching in America. It followed our 2013 report titled Slavery in America, where we documented Montgomery, Alabama's role in the domestic slave trade. Because we think it's really important for communities to understand their past in order to better understand how it plays out for society today. And so for Montgomery, we have a community that is almost predominantly African American, but still very much segregated along the lines of race and class issues. And a lot of that stems back to how people got to the community. And so for the lynching report, just a couple of facts about Marion County. It ranks second for all the lynchings in the state of Florida, and it is in the top 10 counties for the counties that we looked at. We looked at 12 states, all southern states, and we documented over 4,000 lynchings. And we know that there are probably thousands more, but these are the ones that were reported. These are the ones that there was some level of documentation. And why this is important is because it speaks to the ways in which terrorism has completely changed our communities. And so for a lot of times we think about the most recent acts of terrorism and how that's impacted our country. But we've been dealing with domestic terrorism for a long time. And until we confront that narrative, until we hold face to that, we will continue to be challenged by that. So part of the way that we are advocating that we do that at EJI is by documenting that history. So in Montgomery, to complement the slavery report, we also put up historical markers about the slave market in downtown Montgomery. So when you come to Montgomery, and I hope you all do, and stop by EJI, you'll see that there are now historical markers that talk about that history. So throughout our history, we had 60 monuments to celebrate the Confederacy, the first White House of the Confederacy, the post office of the Confederacy, everything that talked about that history, but nothing that talked about how it impacted people of color. And so now we have these other markers that encourage people, even people who aren't going to come to a rally like this one, even ones who aren't interested in thinking about this, have to be encouraged to be engaged with this history. And we want to do something very similar with the lynching report. We want to go to communities across the South and erect lynching markers so that we can bring racial healing to these communities. Because you have to think about it, these are people who were lynched in the heat of the night, and then their families were forced to flee, and no one ever had any type of memorial service. There was never any confrontation. No one was ever held responsible for these things, and so our communities are still not able to recover from that because we've never confronted and acknowledged that they actually happened.